Hi, I'm John Stevens,
This is Matt Russell.
and this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy.
So let's get started.
All right.
Hey,
Hey, John.
well, welcome. This is episode 21.
Woo!
And after episode 21, which now our podcast is legally able to imbibe,
Yeah, we can.
we're going to take a couple of weeks off before we start. Can we call them seasons?
Season
We
one.
can call them whatever we want.
In the bag.
Yeah. So, 21 episodes. We've talked about a lot of things. We thought we might kind of look back and things that were meaningful for us and all that, and maybe look ahead as well. But, yeah, I mean, and just talk about kind of what's going on in the world. We talked about monuments and statues and things in one of the previous podcasts, and Jeff decided to cut all that out. So I'm thinking maybe he made him a little nervous. Maybe?
I don't know. Jeff, you're only as good as your censor.
It was for time purposes
Time.
only. Sure. That's what he says. That's what a good producer says. Sorry, but we just didn't have
We
time.
just didn't have time.
I think there are things that are appropriately to be displayed in museums, places where we remember our history. I am, as a history buff and studied history, that I do think you forget your history, you're doomed to repeat it. The old,
Yeah.
adage goes. Yeah. So you need to learn from your history, and so, but do some of these statues belong in what's called the public square or the public sphere,
Yeah.
where they are then given a certain legitimacy or status. So if you put it in front of the courthouse, a general from a battle of an opposing army that fought against the United States, right? Then what do? Now, the hard part is if we go back, Confederacy, to me, you can make an argument. You don't have to agree with the argument, but you can make an argument and say they existed for 5 years. They rebelled against the United States of America. They tried to break up the experiment that we started long ago, that we celebrated this weekend with the release of Hamilton on Disney+.
Did you see that?
I did. We watched it.
Maybe we should talk about Hamilton.
Oh, it was great. It's good.
I was blown away. Like
Have you not seen it before?
No, never saw it.
Yeah. It's
Anyway.
good. So,
Maybe that's
point
part
being
two.
made, and then I'll be done, is that when then do you go back and say, okay, well, George Washington had slaves, Thomas Jefferson had slaves, John Adams had slaves, or whatever, or I don't know if Adams had slaves or not, but honestly, I know Washington and Jefferson did. And then, what about Andrew Jackson, who was president when the Native Americans were moved out of their native lands? I mean, so at some point, I do think there's an argument that people on the side that are afraid to see these things go, Sarah, what is the line? What line? I mean, who then should we do away as we saw? Should we just name everything like innocuous car names, like Sentra and Electra and
Blue.
Acura,
Name them colors.
and have no statues, and I don't know that that's the right way to go. And so I remember a history professor of mine always talked about the pendulum of history swings, and what happens is the pendulum will swing, and it will swing all the way up until it hits sort of that crescendo,
Threshold, yeah.
and then you'll get a reaction to that history, and you see that move in civilization goes back and forth between conservatism, progressivism, liberalism, as it relates. And I think we're just in the middle of a moment now that is a reaction to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so I think we're just trying to find our footing in all of this.
Yeah. That's really a hard question, because there's something, I've got some personal views on that, but I also wonder, I don't even know what question to ask around it, because in some ways, should those things be up? Is that the right question? Because it feels like that's almost a distraction to, maybe not a distraction, but I feel like that in some ways, if we were to do almost like therapy on our culture right now, it's like that's a question we may want to ask after we do some other work around how do we come back together? What's that about? How do we grieve? What are, those kinds of things. It feels like that everybody's kind of pulled into these kind of polemics and everybody's outraged,
Oh, on all sides.
Everybody's out. Yeah,
And
on
I
all
think
sides.
that's something that you and I have tried to talk about, if people are listening, is that this countercultural nuance is something I think Jesus is leading us
Yeah.
into. It's both and. Think about the essence of Christian faith. Jesus is very much about, or let's just talk about the Bible. The Bible is very much about justice and care for the poor and the widow and the orphan. That sounds very progressive or liberal in its ideological or theological makeup. At the same time, the Bible is very much about sexual purity and no sex before marriage, and that two become one, and they remain one flesh until death do them part. Well, you start looking at that, and it becomes a very conservative. That's a very conservative point of view.
Yeah.
So when you look at the Bible, and especially the teachings of Jesus and Paul and the church, you can't say conservative or liberal because the teachings of our faith are in both spaces. That's the nuance. And I think now the danger in our society is that people do not allow themselves to do the work of nuance. They don't allow themselves that space. And so it's got to be, it's either got to be tear down all of the statues and all of the everything of anyone that had any questionable history, or the other extreme. These are extreme sides I'm defining. Or the other says we're going to protect all of these, no matter what. And then they start name calling each other, and it's just there's no work in the middle for us to do in a healthy way.
Yeah. It's been interesting for me because I haven't known a lot of the history of some of the monuments and those, particularly the Confederate ones, or really any of them. You asked me about when they were made. I have no idea. But to realize that it's interesting that they were, a lot of them were set up during Jim Crow. That's interesting to me. I don't know what to do with that, but they weren't. They happened 100 years or 70 years after the war was the Civil War was fought, and so it's interesting to me that just when those things came up rather than what to do with them, and so I think we're in a place right now culturally where we're deconstructing so much, and we don't know what's going to be constructed out of it, and I think that's why. What we've talked about before, kind of our spiritual core. I've realized the last couple of days I felt spiritually dry, and I just need to double down on kind of leaning into God's Spirit more, kind of doing more of those things that take care of my soul, because I think culturally we're going to need to have some resources to be able to look at wisdom with things, and to look on these cultural things we're up against with some more wisdom. Because we are in a reactive time, where everyone is outraged at everything.
The problem is we become overly dismissive of because we're in a reactive time. Both sides become overly dismissive of each other because we are overreacting. We're reacting, and I know a lot of people would disagree with me saying overreactive, but they talk about it's just human nature 101. When you are reactive in the moment, you operate in, whether it's family systems or organizational systems, you're operating out of emotion.
Yeah.
So the thinking is processing. It's just like whenever you get angry about anything, whenever you go to the grocery store and there's, all the lines are long, and you're waiting, and you got 15 items or less, and you go, and the guy's got 100 items.
You start counting
in that
those
moment.
Things up. You said, I've never done that. Start
in that
that
moment,
building up a resentment.
you don't process in your mind, maybe his elderly mother is at home and he's shopping for her. No, you don't say that. You go off on them.
You become indignant.
It's like people that you hear about, people yelling at each other, wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. It's become this extremism on both sides, either or. And if you're doing it, you're one thing, and if you're not, you're the other thing. And we've lost the ability to have conversations about things. Now, one thing I'll say, and then I'll be done with the monuments. There is an article that actually Robert E. Lee penned a paper, and he was one in his writings. He wrote in 1866, there was a proposal. He said, as regards the erection of a monument, there was a talk about a potential Stonewall Jackson monument. He was a general in the, and actually Robert E. Lee was opposed to it. He said, my conviction is that however grateful it would be to the feelings of the South, the attempt in the present condition of the country would have the effect of retarding instead of accelerating its accomplishment, and of continuing, if not adding to, the difficulties under which the Southern people labor. He went on to say that he felt like it would contribute to divisiveness, and it would not bring unity to put up these monuments around the Confederacy. And that was in a proposal he wrote in 1866, because he felt like you shouldn't put these monuments up to the South for him or for anyone else, because it didn't allow the country to heal and come back together. It perpetuated the division. Yeah. And if it helps there to be more unity among us, to love one another more fully, then it doesn't mean, you know, I would prefer that there be a process by which we could, with civility, remove these. Some cities have chosen to remove the statues and place them in a sacred or a special place, not a sacred place, but a special set aside place for the purposes of remembering the history, with also context given.
Yes.
Like, when was this statue put up?
Yeah.
And you'll recognize a lot of it was in the early 20th century as a perpetuating or permissiveness to Jim Crow segregation.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know that.
You know, it's interesting. This discussion also taps into something of folks that I've really loved that have, one of my heroes that have read probably every book he's written is Jean Vanier. You know, and the discovery that Jean Vanier had been acting out sexually with folks within his organization after he died. That kind of, all the stuff kind of came out. So it's like, you kind of like, what do you do with that? You know, it's that really difficult space of saying, I feel attracted to this person, and they also have struggled with these things, you know, and it's how do we hold the light and the darkness together, you know? And I still feel like it goes back for me, like to what you're saying, is how the core of this has to be, at least for us as Christians, has to be, how do we love the world and each other? How do we perform that love in ways that are self-giving and kenotic, as Paul says, that giving up of and emptying ourselves into for the world, you know? I don't think that we draw lines in the sand and, you know, pick up arms against each other, but I think that there's, you know, this deep calling of Jesus, blessed are the peacemakers.
I think the big challenge that you and I will discover and face, and that as we go forward, not only in society but within the church, is that our society is becoming less religious, more secular. And so the church now is relegated to its ancient position as coming from the margins and the sideline. We're not the predominant cultural voice as much as some people would like for us to be. That's really not the reality anymore.
No.
And so the voice we have to proclaim cannot be the voice that reaffirms a cultural power
really
structure
good.
And political structure.
That's right.
We have to come from a countercultural perspective. We will be prophetic. We will be disturbing. Yes. And many people who have sat in the pews for their whole lives are going to find churches to be more and more disconcerting if they're at the right kind of church.
Yeah. Do you think we'll find that the church is either kind of doubling down on this kind of cultural, you know, this kind of cultural thing about we are the center, and other churches will realize that, oh wait, it's fluid, it's spirit, it's we've got to be much more.
You see it now. Yeah. Look at, and it's the big I think thing in our culture has been around what they use the term Christian evangelical, which you need to define the terms, because the way I define an evangelical is someone who believes that a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is a central part of your faith characteristic. To be born anew, born again, born from above.
Okay.
And in that sense, I am an evangelical, but I am not a Christian evangelical in the sense that some people talk about, like Jerry Falwell Jr. over at his university, who, you know, approves of everything the government or the president says at all times, every way, and says his own stupid stuff or whatever. To me, there's ever since the 4th century, when Christianity became the religion of the empire, we have had a really difficult time dancing on the edges of being in the center of the culture as far as power structures and the secular political government, and trying to also be that prophetic voice on the edge. And I don't know that you can really do both well.
Yeah.
It's like when you go I grew up in a church where every weekend on July 4th you had the Patriotic Pops concert, and you had the Yankee Doodle Dandy, and you played the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines and the Coast Guard and everything, and the flags were marching in and all that kind of stuff. I mean, honestly, I like that stuff. I love that stuff. But I don't. But I think there's a time and a place where can we, at the center of the culture, where the church is in the center of the culture, and can participate in a way and stay prophetic. I'm not so sure that we're in that place anymore. I'm not sure that we were really ever should have landed comfortably in that space.
Right.
But I can see how in our history we could operate from within that space and still push us to the highest ideals of what not only the Christian faith, but what our country is about.
Yeah.
Now I see we're so divided and so separated that Christians are going to have to make a choice. They're going to choose to be a part of a faith community that's willing to be countercultural and speak to the powers and the principalities that are not biblical in this sense. Or they're just going to jump on a church that sort of aligns itself with all the cultural echo chambers of some partisan loyalty, and is co-opting in some ways the faith for some hybrid kind of thing that's more civil religion than it is gospel faith.
You know, as we've talked over these last 21 episodes. One of the things that I've been confronted with.
Feels like 800.
It does. I guess 21. That's not right, Jeff. It's got to be.
We've been doing this at least for like 3 years.
That it feels like that what we're after is a maturing faith. A faith that is like the way what Christian Wyman says is if I believe what I believed at 15, what I believe at 50, I haven't grown, right? There's a sense in which my faith, if I'm affirming the same structures, the same things at 15 as a faith person, that what I did, and I project that to when I'm 50, there's not been growth. I think about Fowler stages of faith.
Yeah.
And I wonder if in so many ways we are in a young experience, an experiment as a country, and if what we're being called at this kind of inflection point is to grow, and we need more nuance, we need more space to understand each other, we need more curiosity at a very time where all that feels like it's being sucked out.
And Christians are going to be challenged. American Christians are going to be challenged to continually test our loyalties.
Yes.
What has our highest loyalty? Because when the gospel message is proclaimed and it confronts your political partisan ideology, and you find yourself now angry and all of a sudden now you have to do something with that. So what do you do with it? Well, I put it in this pot. You must be, I've been accused of being a liberal Democrat, and I've been accused of being a closed-minded conservative Republican. And again, as you go back to the gospel, there's both, as you would define, those terms are not used in the Bible, but they're very progressive, socially, what you would define as liberal things about the teachings of the gospel, and then there are very conservative things about the teaching of the gospel. Yeah. And so if that doesn't fit with your secular political ideology, what do you have to do? Well, now you got to start doing some mental gymnastics, right, to make this work in your world so that it doesn't just take instead of going, hey, that really screwed up my whole worldview, and let me wrestle with that.
Yeah,
Let
right.
me wrestle with why that is. That's something that Jesus taught would challenge the way I view like politics in the world and what I say and what I think. And we don't do that. We just immediately dismiss what it is that's not reinforcing our own worldview, which is why I think what I see coming in the future, if we talk about, can we do prophecies?
Come on, bring it.
Like, here's what I see.
Prophecy.
I think what COVID will do, what pandemic will do, is first, you will see more and more people will leave their current churches. And if they go to another church, they will more align with a church that shares their secular, political, partisan, ideological worldview than to seek out a church that says, and what they'll say is, because that's what they want to align with. And once they get to that church that reaffirms their secular, political, partisan, ideological worldview,
Okay.
they'll get there and they'll go, this church preaches the word of God.
Now I'm getting fed here.
This church, this church preaches the word of God. Well, I always am skeptical, when people say that. It's like, oh, so preaching the word of God as you want it to be preached.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, we have lots of different denominations, and we have different types of churches, and we say and do different things in different ways because we do read the Bible differently.
Yeah.
People are going to have to make up their minds where they're going to land on that. But I hope and pray that people will allow themselves to be challenged.
Yeah. One of the things I'm loving about being at Chapelwood is the fact that we are leaning into, like, we've got this amazing root system as Wesleyans, right? I mean, Wesleyans were, at least our denomination was birthed out of a lot of social disruption that was attempting to create community among those places that were being socially disturbed and saying, wait, God is here, and we can come together in ways around spiritual kind of disciplines, around serving each other, serving a world that's distinctly different. So we've got a root system, and we're leaning at this, at least in our local congregation, we're leaning to the future, saying, God, you also come to us from the future, not just from the past. So what does it mean for us to be faithful? Right? Not just faithful to maintain something that's always been, but what does it mean for us to be faithful into the future that you're calling us into? And that's the space that I get excited about and afraid about. That what's God up to? What's He calling us to?
Thinking back over the last 20 episodes of things we've talked about, what stood out to you as I don't know, memorable or?
There's a couple there's a couple. One I really enjoyed, like Mark Boom came on at a time that was like super helpful.
It was right at the beginning of this growth of COVID.
And just to have someone with expertise that's like really a non-anxious presence, it was just very helpful. And your relationship with him has been something I think for our church has been like an anchor point. As you talk about dropping an anchor, it's like, okay, here's wisdom that's in our midst we could listen to. The other was when we talked to the chaplains as well.
Oh, Stacy and Bob.
I loved listening to their stories and just realizing that kind of pastoral care like was happening. The way that they were innovating spiritual care for folks was really touching to me.
Yeah, I think back on, the episode, we started this thing and we were going to talk about the church and go in the future. We had, just think about the problems that we were dealing with when we started this. And then COVID, and then the economy, and then really the race that
Oil.
I think Cleve and Christian to me visiting with us, having conversations, hearing from friends of ours who are black in this country, who are pastors and just educators, and just to hear, I think, I've known Christian a long time, and I think I heard the way that he said things very differently in light of where we are than I may have before.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, again, my antennae, my ears are engaged in a different way.
Yeah.
But that was helpful for me.
Yeah.
It was helpful for me. The biggest thing is, and I've seen Christian live this out because many people at Chapelwood know him and love him. And I know a lot have been asking him. And the same thing, it's like, don't ask me to do your work for you.
Yeah.
I've been working this and laboring in this race issue my whole life.
Yeah.
And I think Cleve said something like the same way. We don't necessarily have to be friends to be allies, but also we've got to do our own work. We can't depend upon Christian or Cleve to clean everything up for us and make us feel okay and explain everything unto us.
That's right. I think that's been the biggest work, the biggest help for me over the last 5 or 6 years as I've waded into this, is to realize that, there's all these books, there's all this learning, there's all this journey that I can go on that is a spiritual journey at its core. And that I think the church right now is being called to, in so many ways, to look at, to amass knowledge, so that in the future we can begin to use that as whatever God is constructing out of what will come. Oh, yeah.
I think the podcast has been great. And I think one of the things when you talk about what does the future of the church look like, when we come back in a couple of weeks, I'm sure we'll have some conversations around that and continuing current events and things that are going on. But it always amazes me how everybody wants to get back to normal. They want to get back to normal, and I think if you get back to normal, you're regressing.
Yeah,
you're moving backwards.
Yeah.
This is going to change everything, and anyone who thinks that a vaccine in December is going to flip the switch and everything is going to go back to the way it was, you're going to have some people that may never come back to church regularly. You're going to have some older adults that may not come back for a long time. I think about some older adults that may not be in the church again before their life is over because of the amount of time. I mean, it'll be a year or more. I think about the other night we were talking about what does Christmas Eve look like?
Right.
I mean, Easter is a really big Sunday in church, but I'm telling you, Christmas Eve.
Oh, that's the granddaddy of all.
That's the Super Bowl. Yeah. Everybody thinks Easter's the Super Bowl. Easter is a Sunday morning. Christmas Eve is all day. It's evening. It's candlelight. It's singing. There's the memories around your family connection that I think go deeper and penetrate into the fibers of your being.
Yes.
That if that doesn't happen, or you can't come, or it can't happen in the same way, I think will be very. I think it'd be really traumatic for people.
Yeah.
Traumatic for us. I mean, think about in the past we've had to have 18 services. I don't think praise the Lord, we won't have to have that many anymore. That'll be great. But I'm thinking about the way that the church is going to now digitally be engaged, and people are going to be engaged in a digital, and you can actually ramp up digital engagements. You can expand that easier than you can things physically in person. So this podcast to me is like one leg of what is the future way of engaging and conversing and learning and engaging in nuance and all these sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole new menagerie of things that we're going to have to keep trying and pushing out, and ways of connecting. And I'm going to be interested to know the interplay between the technology and then the ways that we gather. Is the technology about kind of information and those kinds of things, sermons, those things. But then how do we then is there going to be new ways of gathering? Will it be in people's backyards? Will it be smaller groups? Will it be, how will we do that? Because I know that even the week that we met a couple weeks ago,
the practice run,
it was like Michelle and I came and we sat down, and it was just like it was just so good. There was something in my heart that was like water was flowing into this dry ground, and both of us were tearing up. It
goes back to that collective, sacramental, mystical thing when people gather together. It's the reason why you love to go to an Astros game or a UT or an A&M football game, and I don't even root for those football teams, but I remember the first time I went to an Aggie game, and I thought, you can't help but
you
just
can't
get
help me.
when they throw their arms around your neck and start swaying back and forth, and I don't know what they're singing about, sawing some poor old
satanic
cow's
song. You're in it.
horns off or something. But I mean, when they go through this, there is a liturgy.
Yes.
It's the work of the people in this moment that is so conditioned down in your DNA. And even though I don't know anything about it, and I'm not an Aggie, and I don't understand it, I'm in the moment, and I'm swaying back and forth, and you
For
feel
a moment,
something.
you're an Aggie.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, but you feel it. You can't help but. So it doesn't matter whatever. It's like you think about college football, which, by the way, we might not even have. But you think about all of the traditions that you're steeped in, and the things that, at the end of at the University of Georgia football games, at the end, the band does the concert, and they do the Battle Hymn of the Republic, slow. During the game, it's like, every time it's like da, 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 but at the end it's like a very slow orchestral moving. I mean, people are brought to tears by the playing of the song at the end of the game, and the football players gather in the corner, and it's every school has their thing.
I mean, I think about what a professor said to me one time, that there's no substitute for flesh, right? Like there's no, and in fact, like it's like you said, it's in the way we're designed, in our very DNA. I mean, the
God drew it up that way.
Yeah.
Not only created us to be together, but then comes in flesh.
Yeah, that's right.
In flesh.
And the first problem, I think, in Genesis wasn't sin. It was human beings being isolated. There was no counterpart. There was no flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone, And so I think I'm interested in seeing how we gather, what that's going to look like, and
You'll never lose physical gathering. There was an article that I think I sent you. You'll never lose physical gathering at all. It's going to come back. I mean, we will be back and gather again. But I think, like you said, it's going to be very different. We're going to be thinking more in terms of, a lot of churches, Sunday morning worship was the centerpiece in what it did and what it offered. I mean, everything a church did revolved around Sunday morning worship service. Now I think you're going to see, which I think is a good thing, and I think this is the problem that a lot of people, the struggle that a lot of people have, which is why they want to have church back again, because it is so deep in the fiber of your being, and you really do miss it, and you really are aching and longing and grieving, and you don't even know. But in some ways, it's also because we have not taught people sufficiently that church is much more than that. 1 hour on Sunday morning. It's actually a very small part of what we are and what we do.
Right.
And yet it's become 95% of what we are and what we do. Yeah. And so when that's not happening, people think the church is not in existence. It's not working. It's not active. It's not open. Yeah. And that's not true.
I wonder if the church, partly of where the church will go, is to be a resource center for like almost a regional resource center where folks come to learn, they come to be equipped. All these kinds of things are being pushed out. It really is about what you've talked about before. It's really about the impact that a local church has on its zip code and the zip codes around us. Right, so that if a church were to fall in on itself, would folks within the community rise up and say, "Wait, we need you. What you've been doing, the ripple effect of why you're here and what you do while you're here is absolutely essential for who we are as a community. You can't go anywhere." Yeah. I think those are the kinds of churches that.
What I love about being at Chapelwood is. Well, let me start by saying this wilderness that we're in, COVID wilderness, along with all of the other things that have happened, it really does sap the water from your soul. Yeah. Even though you might not be physically as busy, there's an emptiness. You can't really put your finger on it. You can't describe it. You just know there's something missing. There's a void. And it's almost like you're wandering in the darkness, and you're trying to get some gauge, some bearing, something to give you a sense of direction to move in. And it's like you don't have that. And I was texting with someone this morning who was saying, what does the future look like for the church? He said, how are you all doing at Chapelwood? I said, well, on the one hand, we're like most anyone else. We're trying to keep our head above water, and we're fumbling around in the darkness.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I think God has opened doors for us, and I think it's always, one of the things I've loved about this church is that whatever we've done, it's always been rooted in our unique history, the embodiment of grace. I think your involvement, like in starting Mercy Street, the way that happened, the way we've done worship communities, the way we've been very intentional not to cookie cutter a video in pastor so that everything is, culturally, homogeneity, everything looks and feels and tastes the same, but this broad diversity that we've birthed with the Upper Room, with Mercy Street, with the Center for Contemplative, Christian Spirituality, Fairhaven, Generaciones, our partnership with Spring Spirit, the teen and family services, on and on and on. And you go through this thing and you're like, that's not your typical growth model. It's not your typical church model.
Right.
It's like almost, I know people, when they look at our model, I've had people tell me, that's really not sustainable. It's not controllable. It's too chaotic. And that makes me happy.
Me too. I think God's up to something there. That shouldn't work.
But what I look back on and I think about, through the merger or the hybrid models of things that we've engaged in, like with Spring Spirit, I look now and I say, these are going to be the doors that we're going to, the pillar, the foundation that we're going to build on going in the future. So I think you see a lot of hybrid church social ministry models taking place, which we're not going to be afraid of or opposed to because we've already done that.
Yeah.
And so, when you're in ministry with another nonprofit, Spring Spirit, that we kind of help birth, but they're separate 501c3, and they work and swim in a different realm, and yet we have a staff person there, and they work with us, and we work with them, and you're like, wait a minute, what are the formal lines that are drawn there? It's like, well, we kind of just let that, bleed in and out, and people are like, well, that doesn't make sense. You can't control that. It's like, yeah, it's the whole point. It's like we go wherever it takes us, and then it grows and it expands, leads us in new directions. And I think that's going to be the future you're going to see, is a very different way of the church being the church in the world. And so it's less located in a physical building, which we're learning now. But we're having to be taught this the hard way.
Yes.
Through denial. This is what fasting does for you.
Yeah.
We are actually in a period of fasting from the physical location, the physically located building, which is culturally oriented around Western civilization, that the church has to be constructed, the cathedral, the building, and we have to go to that to remind us to point upward. Think about architectural styles, the way a church is constructed with the high vaulted ceilings and the cross and the nave, and all of the imagery of architecture is to take you out of the world and bring you to a physical location so you can be reminded of heaven, reminded of spirituality, reminded and pointed back to. And now what's going to happen is, okay, it's not going to be physically located culturally. You're now going to have to learn to find that in the places and the spaces where you find yourself.
That's right.
And so it's going to happen at Spring Spirit. It's going to happen at MAM. It's going to happen in new ministries that haven't even started and been created. Restoration Team.
Yes.
That came out of Hurricane Harvey.
That's right.
That now it's separating into a separate 501c3, which could evolve into a networking ministry that works on those who are in our community that are in housing vulnerability, or their houses are collapsing around them, and you need a ministry that churches can participate in to help people keep a roof over their head.
Right.
That's going to be as much, if not more, church, and not just, oh, here's Chapelwood, and we have this little ministry over here. I'm not saying we ever think of it as a little ministry, but the way we view things is, here's the church, here's the steeple, open the door, and there's all the people. That old imagery is going to be totally reshaped, recast in the new world.
Right. It's interesting to me that when I kind of 80s, 90s, there was all this idea about the attractional model or the seeker sensitive or all those kind of things. And what you're talking about are folks that are doing things in the community, feeding, housing, asking kind of these primary questions, getting after some of the collaborative efforts to kind of close some of the gaps, whether that's education or whether that's just kind of basic kind of needs that we have as human beings, and that makes us more human together, which really makes us more Jesus together the more human we get. And so I feel like that then there's like multiple on-ramps. The first question isn't when you come in is, what do you think about Jesus? The first thing is, let's get to know our neighbors in these places. And as we're doing the work, like, we get visited by Jesus, and these primary kind of questions about who God is come up in the midst of that work. And in some ways, we've divided that historically, and it's going to have to come back together. What we do, discipleship, and what we do is always embedded together. And I think that there's going to be multiple on-ramps, and it's going to look messy like you're talking about. But I think that because of that, we're going to enter into these relationships that are really going to give us, I think, both life and vision. And
I just love it when somebody who operates under these church growth, expansive, like attractional model type deal, and they're starting a separate campus with video venue, and it's the homogeneous, and then they look at our model, or what I'd say model, they just look at us and go, that's not going to work, and I'm thinking,
watch.
COVID is going to relegate you to a different place.
Right. Because there's something about the way that Chapelwood has done it, which really takes context. Like, it's not about exporting a person. It's about understanding the context and the relationships, and knowing that the Spirit of God, like, in a sense, broods over the chaos of that context to draw something out. And so it's not just kind of bringing in a big footprint and saying, this is how we do it, let's export it. But it's like it's being in the context, asking the question, what's happening? Right? That's one of the names of God. Or at least Stephen Verney says that you can translate the name of God in the Old Testament, I am that I am, as something is happening. And so to look at a context and say, God, what's happening, is to really be involved in the happening of God. And I think that's what this church has done in those places, is not just kind of export a video in, but has said, God, what are you doing in Spring Branch, Northern Spring Branch? What are you doing in the school systems? What are you doing with this kind of diverse community called the Upper Room? What are you doing with Generaciones? And
that's what I love about being here is, I believe that I've been given certain gifts. Some things I do well, some things I don't do well. And one of the things I know, I tend to portray a lack of humility sometimes to other people. I always tell people I'm proud of my humility. And some people but I've always had this, always underlying is a confidence, yes. But there's always underlying, it's like, I don't have to be the center of this. And I don't know what it is in me that God wired me in a certain way to say, I don't have to be the center of everything that we do. I have my role and I have what I do. And then to bring you on and to make you a partner, to utilize our staff, to utilize our worship pastors, and to elevate their role in the visionary leadership that we go forward. It's not one person. If it is one person, we're going to be severely hamstrung and limited. Yeah. And I just don't think that's a good way to move and live. So is it harder? Yes, it's harder. But as they say, no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
The harder way is always the better way.
And it's healthier. I think like it frees you being who you are, like frees us up to be who we are, right? I mean, knowing that you're holding the gifts that God has given you over this whole thing in terms of the way that you think brilliantly about systems allows me to think nutty about the edges, right? Knowing that I'm tethered to the center, right? And that's, I just think there's something about the way...
They told me that about you.
What about?
That you were nutty.
A lot of trail mix here.
What else? Anything fun? Anything funny? Anything exciting?
Is there questions we could ask each other?
No. I don't want any serious. I don't want anything deep.
Okay. Like, what's a movie you've watched in the last week that you've liked, or something you've seen?
So, a movie that I've watched?
Yeah.
So we went through, of course, at the first, can we
Besides
call
Hamilton.
it quarantine 1 and then quarantine, like first quarantine, we did the Harry Potter movies
Yeah.
every night, like 8 nights in a row. And I thought, what a hell to live in. But we made it.
What the hell to live in?
No, it was actually, they were cute.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say the second quarantine. This is what I call, there was this first one was the stay-at-home order. Now this is the stay-at-home recommendation that we're in. And in this one, we decided to go back and watch the Marvel superhero movies, but we wanted to watch them in chronological order based on like when they happened in time. So even though like Captain Marvel was recent, you watched her movie second because she was back in the 90s or something like that. All right, whatever. But last week we watched The Guardians of the Galaxy, and that is
Isn't that
a
great?
fun movie. Best soundtrack.
Yes.
That's so good soundtrack.
You watch both of them or just the first
Well,
one?
I've seen all of them, but we watched that one again for some reason because, again, the other thing with
It's such a
kids
great
is we
one.
invited them on the journey with us to watch the Marvel movies, which
Yeah.
they did not want to participate because they were too busy gaining fame at TikTok. And so then, now all of a sudden, they're like, I'd like to watch these movies. And then you're forced to have to watch them again because you're a parent and your whole world revolves around your children, even when they're 20 years old.
Yes. Oh, it doesn't change, does it?
Well, but it's good in quarantine if you think about it.
I love it.
Who'd have thunk that you'd be able to be stuck with your 20-year-old? Oh, speaking of stuck, what's your favorite movie? And then I wanted to talk to you about being stuck.
Being stuck. Well, we Miguel and I watched a Quentin Tarantino movie. He's of the age.
Great. Well, those are light, airy movies.
I introduced him to Quentin Tarantino, the World War II one.
Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah, yeah. Which
Horrible movie.
It,
No, I mean it's a really good movie.
yeah, but he loves film. He loves thinking about film. He's taken 2 or 3 film classes in his high school, and he's never watched a Tarantino film. And I thought that would be the easiest one to, and we've talked about it. We
And
watched
Brad
it.
Pitt does a horrible Southern
He
accent.
does. He does.
So,
Stuck.
speaking of being stuck, Harvard, did you see Harvard came out and said everything will be virtual for the entire next year of school? Now you open the can of worms because think about it. You have an entire industry that is built upon and predicated that these students will come to this school, they'll live on campus, they'll get this education, they'll participate in these things. You can't just fold that tent up. It's the same thing that churches are going to be dealing with. At some point, you're not going to need all that space. You're not going to need all that land. You're not going to need all that building if everything becomes more digital and located around in the community is more engagement of the church dispersed in the world.
Yep.
It's not going to be located. So, University of Oklahoma, beautiful campus, beautiful school. I'm sure all these others are as well. And, what's going to happen when half of your students are now online?
Yeah, I mean,
You don't need all those buildings.
Yeah.
And who's going to buy all that land in Lubbock? I hope no one listens to this in Lubbock.
I love
Because
Lubbock. I'll buy it.
Texas Tech, a great basketball school. I mean, football school. I mean, everything. It's a great school.
It's a great
It's a
school,
great-
John.
yeah, it's a
Be
great
careful.
school.
Tread lightly.
But, yeah, I mean, what are you going to do with all that space? So they're not going to be willing. So what schools have done to fix that for them is they'll say, so the standard and accreditation agencies are owned and operated by whom? The schools, right? And so in order for your degree to be accredited, which like some of these onlines are not, a few of them might be, but they're going to say you have to have 2/3 of your coursework has to be done in residency in order for you to get a degree from the University of Oklahoma. So you can't have half of it online or 2/3 online. You can only have so many hours online, right? That protects the institution, protects their budget, protects their income so that they don't lose that. If all of a sudden you could do it all online and have a fully accredited, degree from the University of Oklahoma and never had to go on campus, They couldn't make their model work.
And small universities are going to get killed.
They're going to go away.
I think about like SPU, Seattle Pacific University, where Michelle went, or Azusa Pacific, or, I wonder what's going to happen with some of the Wesley, like the Wiley College.
Well, Centenary, all these, they're going to go away. A lot of them are going to go away. Or be so drastically downsized. And so what happens is, here's the vicious cycle. So you offer more online to keep more students.
Cannibalize it.
But you're basically ceding physical location territory, which means you can't afford the structure of all the buildings, and you can't afford all the professors and everything.
The last 20 years, it seemed like that, universities have been in this race to kind of, because they've realized that students are their clients, and they've built these dormitories that have like state of the art kind of cooking stuff and living arrangements, and then these the rec spaces now have lazy river pools and climbing walls.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you go, that's a big thing. They're trying to recruit you for that. It's all based on being located there. Yeah. So we have kind of just talked about everything. I call this Potpourri Day.
Potpourri Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It was podcast number 21.
It was 21. And
2021.
21, and we're going to take a couple weeks off, and then we're going to come back and get after it again with more guests and fun to be had by all. It'll be fun all around.
I can't wait, John.
I know you can't. So I hope folks will go back and check out some of the previous episodes if you haven't been able to watch them or keep up with them. First week of August, we'll get back on the A train.
Right on.
First week of August. And then I don't know, does the season last 20? A season can last however many episodes we want it to. And season could be 2 episodes, or it could be 21 episodes, or it could be 121 episodes.
Yeah, there's no rules here.
No rules. Anyway, I'm John Stevens.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.